And welcome everybody to the Deer and Winter Severity Index that we talk about with our deer population. We're joined today by our big game coordinator, Todd Froberg. And welcome, Todd, and look forward to your program talking about deer. And they're going to have an easy winter this year, but it hasn't been in the last few years. So,
yeah, thanks, Benji. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk about deer in winter. So obviously, extremely important time of the year for deer. High mortality time for deer, especially during severe winters. As Benji said, I'm Todd Froberg. I'm the big game program coordinator. So help manage and set rules, regulations for deer, elk, moose in the state of Minnesota. So it's a statewide program, not specific or local, but across the whole state. So I guess the exciting ungulate species. So today we're going to talk about mainly or a big portion, the Winter Severity Index or WSI. Some of the recent winters, as Benji alluded to, although this winter is pretty mild and easy, the past decade or so, we've seen some very severe winters and some high snowfall totals. Also talk about some deer adaptations, seasonal diets, and then recreational feeding. All right, so we got a lot to cover, so we'll dive right in. I'll try to do my best to not gloss over lots of stuff, and we'll see how my time goes. I might have to gauge this and start talking really fast at the end. But anyways, WSI, so it's a general indication of winter conditions, a predictive modeling tool to assess deer survival during winter. It's calculated weekly, and we accumulate points throughout the winter. So on the map, as you can see on the right, it's a pretty boring map, or I guess you can look at it as it's a good map for related to deer survival or deer in general. We're everywhere 50 or lower, so a pretty mild winter. I don't probably have to tell anybody this, but you know, everything with this winter is kind of crazy. Little snow, low ice conditions, kind of all that stuff, been extremely mild and warm in general. So how WSI is measured. So it's typically reported, or how we talk about it, on a DPA level, so deer permit area level, or a county level. We accumulate a point for each day. So each day that the air temperature is below or equal 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and then snow depth of 15 inches or greater, you get an accumulation of a point. So not much accumulation this winter. But as you can see on the map on the right hand side, that was last year. In the previous winter before last year, so back-to-back severe winters, these are these more colorful maps. So they're that purple, dark orange, and then into the black are those more severe winters. So what is a severe winter? WSI in Minnesota, we updated in 2020, so it was based off of almost 4 decades, 36 years of calculated data on winter conditions. So 25% of those winters had less than 50 points, so those mild conditions, which you would see in southeastern Minnesota, south central Minnesota, those mild conditions that have lower impacts on deer survival. 50% of winters had moderate conditions, 51 to 119 points, and then those 25% of winters having those severe conditions, so those darker colors. I guess the important things to consider is, like that 50% moderate are kind of our normal winters. The 25% mild is, less than our normal, or the 25% above are severe winters, so more than we typically get. And how do we use WSI? So generally speaking, higher WSI equals lower survival in deer. Lower WSI equals a higher survival in deer. That's pretty simplistic, but in general, a trend. More severe winters result in an adjusted factor to increase mortality within our deer model. And the important part is we know it's a model. We don't just take the model output. We consider area manager input. Is the WSI reliable for their area? And is that what they're actually seeing on the ground? So, and some other specific things, maybe if there's surplus wolf killings, depending on the type of snow, or if it's a extremely severe winter, that does happen. So we take those things into account, maybe increase WSI or mortality rates. And then those higher snow totals, crusted snow, or just in general WSI not matching what their local conditions or what the area managers are seeing. Some limitations, as I talked about, it is a model. So take that for what it is. It's a predictive tool. It's not the only tool. These things are not linear relationships. So there's lots of other factors that impact the winter severity or deer mortality in general. And some of those factors are habitat conditions, quality and quantity, deer density and competition, those back-to-back severe winters. Some of these things we'll go on to talk about in this talk. And then I guess just potential changes, things changing with WSI, and then our potential improvements. So some of those climate trends, we're predicted to have more precipitation and lower or higher temperatures. So generally more snow, and more snow is typically harder on deer than cold weather is. So how is this affecting the WSI model? In general, if we're having more precipitation or more snow, ultimately we're only accumulating 1 point if it's over 15. So 15 inches. So we potentially have the same accumulation, but if we're not having the same cold days, then we have no accumulation. So is it reflective of WSI? Those are things I guess we'll have to determine as we go forward and analyze these things. These habitat conditions that are changing, influencing those improvements for WSI. Does the habitat need to have a bigger weigh in on this? The quality and quantity of habitat, and how WSI affects deer in general if they have quality habitat. Predation rates are not static, they're changing. There's a larger suite of predators that's not just wolves. On an annual cycle, there's more bobcats, more coyotes, compared to decades ago. In certain areas, potentially more bears or less bears. These things can be localized conditions where there's a cyclical effect of changing predator populations. They don't, as I said, they're not just a static, does not happen in a vacuum. There's the changing rate. So some improvements, we could use some more robust vital rates across northern Minnesota. Although we've had some research studies in general, northern Minnesota is a huge area. So as I said, these things do change a little bit locally. And then potentially compounding points at the end. The end of winter is when, which we'll get into later, higher wolf mortality with decreased fitness or decreased body conditions of deer. And especially in those during, I guess, a delayed spring green up, when deer are at their lowest level of fitness and need that nutrient or that green growth, is very vital. So that timing and the type of snow, if we're getting snow towards the end of the season, it can be very detrimental to a deer that is at the end of its reserves. And again, something that potentially might be changing with this warmer, different weather, that freeze and thaw cycle. So if we're getting snow and then it's crusted at the top, it makes it a lot easier for wolves and predators to run on top of the snow versus deer falling through the snow. And then the table on the right, just in general, you can see the WSI rating for the last few years. And in general, we've had some fairly high WSI ratings in the last decade. And this is one of the last decade is one of the highest snow totals that we've seen. So just a quick comparison to other state models. Other states do use WSI models. So Wisconsin has a very similar model. They accumulate the same for degree days. The difference, I guess, that they use is a 18-inch marker for snow. and have a couple little different categories for mild, moderate, and severe. Their map is a little bit, Wisconsin's kind of funny in that sense. They're a little bit backwards, maybe. Their map seems inverse to me, but anyway, the red is mild conditions, the green is more severe. So, and then South Dakota, they're using I guess like a monthly calculated and then an annual calculated off the monthly, which is extrapolated from NOAA data across deer units. Not super important, but just I guess highlighting the fact that other states do use different models. All right, so what does all this mean? Well, there's then some research studies in northern Minnesota, specifically in this forested area, that look at cause-specific mortality and predation rates. A study, Nelson and Meach from 1986, so data collected from 1973 to 1983, found very high survival among females, 80% survival. And the main causes of mortality was wolves and hunting. Not a big surprise in winter or fall and winter. And hunting specifically was males. It was a bucks only for a long period of time, so there was no female harvest. But this is predictive on snow depth, and similar to the I guess Mindy and our own Glenn Dalgidis long-term study that he's had in north central Minnesota. From this data collected from 91 to 96. This is on female deer only. So a little bit different from the Nelson Meach study, which was on all age and sex cohorts. But this one was female deer. So a key takeaway or a main quote from the study. So winter severity increases natural mortality, principally from wolf predation, and that same thing seen, the hunting and wolves are the primary proximate cause of death in winter. And that's pronounced in late winter. Not super surprising when considering predation on deer in general. So if we're thinking about this, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but compensatory mortality and additive mortality. So a lot of this is likely, and explained, we'll dive a little bit deeper into this on the next couple slides, but pronounced in late winter. So a lot of these deer are in very low body condition, so very susceptible to predation. So, but still overall high adult female survival. And then this as another DNR project, so Smith and Dalgidis and 2020. So this is unpublished data, 3 years of data, and the caution here is that it's unpublished. In 2017, there was only 10 collared females, so a low end there, and had more collared deer in the last 2 years. But this was a specific study, cause-specific mortality on adult females, and this had a result of lower than anticipated survival among adult females. So what that says is there's also a likely higher mortality across all age cohorts, because we know that usually those adult females go into winter in the best condition. And secondly, a higher than anticipated wolf predation. So I think what the important thing to take away here is that 3 studies typically seeing usually high survival in females, with the exception of the latest. So a lot changed from 1973 to 2020. So we have differing habitat conditions, differing suite of predators. So that predator-prey relationship is switching, and then just location. So, you know, this is not all apples to apples. Lots changing, and a different maybe potential proximate cause versus an ultimate cause of death. So that proximate cause would be a death by a hunter or a death by a wolf, versus the ultimate cause being potentially those severe winters driving that, and or those habitat conditions increasing mortality. And again, from one of Glenn Dalgidis' study, so there I want to speak, I guess, a little bit about these back-to-back severe winter conditions. So in the first severe winter of 95 and 96, so as you can see on the graph on the right, so on the y-axis, which is up and down, that percent winter mortality, versus on the x-axis, the winter severity index. So a linear relationship. As winter severity increases, percent of winter mortality also increases. So the winter of 1995 is that red box. The winter of 1996 and 97, so those back-to-back severe winters, is the blue box. So in that first winter, high deer densities, high mortality. In general, mortality among female deer was 32%. Estimated mortality across all cohorts in the forest zone was 40%. Fawn survival was extremely low. So have low reproduction and higher mortality. Coming into the second winter, and this maybe doesn't seem super intuitive, but we'll explain this. So mortality among adult female deer was only 7.8%, and fawn production and survival were high. So I guess if we're thinking about this from a biological aspect, weeding out those particularly vulnerable individuals. So those fawns, old, sick, injured, the weak, the rundown, the strong survive. So as I said, females are typically the highest, adult females have the highest survival rate among the sex cohorts, or the age and sex cohorts. So the first to die are typically the fawn, the young of the year. They're inexperienced, don't know how to survive winter, coming in with low reserves. And the next to go is typically adult males. They're run down from the rut. Really specifically from breeding season, so don't have those reserves like an adult female would coming into the winter. Those juveniles next, and then the highest surviving age cohort is typically adult females. So again, back to this back-to-back severe winters as lower deer densities in general. Obviously, if we have higher mortality in the first winter, and the second winter we have a lower deer density, less surviving fawns from that first year. So those less surviving fawns entering winter equals less competition. And most females that survived the first winter lost those fawns early as stillborns or aborted fetuses. So or death within days of birth. So they didn't have to nurse those fawns. It's the greatest, cost or expense for does throughout the year. So they had the ability to recover and came into that second winter as exceptionally good condition. So here I have a disclaimer slide. I have, I guess, a few images of, fetuses and then dead deer. So I guess if you're squeamish, I have 3 slides with, I guess, graphic content. It's not too graphic, but it's just if you're squeamish, you may want to look away. So that's my disclaimer. So on this slide, we have a wolf-killed doe, and this shows, I guess, poor body condition in general. Though the picture on the left, you can see the difference in size of those fetuses. One fetus is quite a bit bigger than the other fetus. There are sex differences in size of fetuses, with males usually larger, but it's not usually as pronounced. This could be indicative of just that low body condition, not being able to support 2 fetuses, providing the nutrients to both of the fetuses. The middle picture showing that much of the fat reserves are exhausted. Not a lot of fat on the rump. Not a lot of fat on those the back, or along the spine. I guess if you're butchering a deer, where those back straps would be, there's usually quite a bit of fat again on that rump. As you can see, not much there. So very low fat reserves. And the picture on the right is I guess showing gut content, but that caul fat around. So a typical way for assessing herd and deer health is that caul fat or visceral fat, and then kidney fat. So I just wanted to show this. This is a very common indicator of a healthy deer versus on the next slide, I'll show you a deer that is maybe at the end of its reserve or indicative of starvation. But these first few pictures are a bone marrow, showing that nice white pinkish good bone marrow. This is an early season deer, car killed, so plenty of fat and good bone marrow versus this one where it's plainly obvious when you go on a field necropsy. This very dark red bone marrow. It looks like jelly. Very indicative of starvation. This is a later season winter killed deer. Yeah, so in general, you can very different bone marrow conditions. Moving on a little bit, so historical WSI, just like there's a lot going on here, but I like looking at the slide. It kind of shows those cyclical differences and just those, as the years and the bumps and the peaks and the valleys. So what's highlighted here, well, first off, sorry, I'll go with the kind of the ecotypes here. The what we should what we're looking at with this is when we're talking about winter severity index mostly is that tall grass, aspen parklands, that light green, and then that Laurential mixed forest, so that the blue color. So in northern Minnesota, so where we're seeing these most pronounced winter severity index values. So what's highlighted here is after our severe winters of 95, 96, 97, so that 97 or 96, 97 winters at that peak, and then where we have a string of very mild winters after that into the early 2000s, where we had a peak of deer harvest, not only in Minnesota but in the Midwest. So high deer harvest, string of mild winters, so that very low valley of WSI values. And on this shows historical harvest, so those natural fluctuations as I talked about, and some other factors. This isn't just WSI, but hunter numbers, quality and quantity of habitat, those hunting conditions. We typically see very good harvest when we have good weather. More people are in the woods versus people don't want to sit in the woods when it's pouring rain or conditions like that. So also bag limits influence this, and as we are talking about winter severity. But those 2 years, 97, after several years of severe winters, a valley in harvest, building up to 2003, which was the peak of harvest in Minnesota, after a string of mild winters. And then in comparison to the graph on the left-hand side is Wisconsin's, the graph on the right-hand side is Michigan's. But you can see very similar trends within the data, those peaks and the valleys after these winters that are talked about. And of course, there's differences and variations within the state, but we had those very high harvests in the early 2000s and had very mild winters. So, and you can see, I guess, with Wisconsin and Michigan, they're peaking at nearly the same time. So, and just digging more in a specific case study of these two winters, these are the WSI for 96 and 97 winters. So some very severe winters, those dark colors, black, purple, and then those are the two maps on the left-hand side. The map on the right-hand side is the deer harvest. So you can the darker colors are where there's more deer harvested per square mile, or I guess sorry, that's total harvest. Versus the lighter colors are the total deer harvest as well by DPA, so deer permit area. And as you can see, in general, less harvest in northeast Minnesota, northern Minnesota versus the central and the southern part of the state. Versus our string of mild winters. and low WSI. So the WSI for 2001 and 2002, very similar and boring map to this year. Not a lot of colors on there. Similar to 2020 or 2002 and 2003. Fairly mild winters, not or low winter severity. And as you can see from the 2003 map, much higher harvest in northern Minnesota in general in the central part of the state. So changing harvest based on WSI. In these maps together, we had 143,000 deer harvested in 1997, a low, and then in 2003, 290,000 deer. So a total of 6 years following several mild winters, doubled deer harvest. So a huge increase. Just a little bit more historical harvest. So zone 100, that general decline, as we've talked about, some very snowy, our last decade's been very snowy and similar to the 200 in width, or the zone 200. So making up the rest of northwestern Minnesota versus that 300 and 600 series been fairly stable. So one thing, important thing to note in something that's really been changing in recent years is the composition of where harvest is distributed across the state. We used to have a much more evenly harvested distribution of deer across the state, with northern Minnesota comprising a much greater proportion of harvest than it currently is now. The middle 200, zone 200 DPAs, so that central part of the state, the transition zone, those agricultural areas that are in the southeast, that driftless region is really, I guess, bringing up the harvest or comprising a larger portion of harvest today compared to previous years or previous decades. All right, we'll move a little bit into deer winter adaptation. So you maybe heard of Bergman's rule. So just in general, the farther north you go or the higher latitudes, deer have larger body sizes. So larger bodies have smaller surface area to volume ratios, so they retain heat more efficiently. So this is why you see maybe the average buck in Minnesota 170 pounds versus the average buck in Florida 115 pounds. Fur coat. So the changing color of a coat, from summer coat to winter coat, that lightish reddish color, not a lot of under fur, guard hairs short, thin, and solid in the summer versus winter. So we're getting that dark brown gray for heat absorption, and then that dense woolly underfur, guard hairs longer, thicker, and that hollow insulation. So the more air trapped creates more heat for them. And those, if you've seen the I guess a fawn or the picture, I guess on the right hand side, that deer in the winter, pretty cute, cuddly. They look like a yeti with their face and their hair sticking out. So those skin muscles to change the angle of the fur to create more insulation, that more air trapped, similar to like a bird's feathers. A buildup of body fat. So during the fall, so you probably, or maybe have typically heard that there's like a 90-day fat reserve. So a 3-month period. Once you start extending past that 90 to 100 day, if we don't start getting into spring greenup or don't have quality habitat, deer really start to struggle. So they significantly decrease their activity, so they don't hibernate or go into torpor like some other animals, but slows their weight loss since their decreased activity, and allows them to eat less and lower quality food. Lower limbs have little muscle, lots of tendon and bone, so they can stand in the snow without getting cold. That specialized gut microbe that helps them digest that low quality food. It takes a week or two for that to build up. So when they're switching foods, and then they're able to utilize that winter habitat for food and cover. So potentially, as this slide indicates, lots of does migrate for winter. So finding those high quality areas of protection. So that protection from the element, protection from predators, And then those foods. So important quality winter habitat is providing 70% canopy conifer cover. Those branches and needles are catching the snow, so creating those thermal benefits from the wind, and then also deflecting that snow. So you see far less snow under these conifers, creating those good bedding areas, and as I mentioned, away from the wind. And then on the way to these yarding areas are these well-defined trail systems, so they can move more efficiently, moving from the yarding areas into their feeding areas. So the best well, I got a spelling error there on my conifer trees, but best snow shelter conifer trees. So the cedar fir, and then the mixed conifers, white and red, jack pine, spruce. So it's good to have a good diversity of species, and then close to, as I mentioned, that important browse. So hardwood trees or shrubs, very common ones, maple, oak, red osier dogwood, and then those young tree sprouts. As you can see, there's very little diversity here. Red pine plantation, just creating no food. So creating that diverse forest structure of age and species differences, creating the quality winter habitat in the forested areas, and also those immediate food sources, as I mentioned. So one thing to note about this is those quality wintering habitats, especially that thermal, those older growth conifer species, can take decades to create. We're talking, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. So it doesn't happen in the blink of an eye. It's a lifetime for us of changing habitats. And that is why it's very important to have those diverse forested, or the mix of coniferous and deciduous tree species, and as well as those various age classes. Other important winter habitat throughout the state. This is mainly focused on northern Minnesota, but of course in other areas are those buffer strips or those riparian areas, those conservation reserve program areas, so CRP, creating those native grasslands, and also cattails. So creating again that thermal cover. So seasonal diets of deer, and also highlighting the importance of browse species in winter. This is a graph from David Hewitt of the biology and management of whitetail deer. So metadata, but this is from the National Deer Association. This graph I think is really cool, showing the differences of the importance per season. So on the bottom, that spring, summer, fall, and winter, in the changing composition of diets from browse, forbs, mast, those crops, grass, lichens, and fungus. So, and in general, I think one thing to highlight, a lot of people think deer eat a lot of grass, but they really don't. And it's typically pretty refined what types of grass they're eating. They're usually concentrating on those forbs, mast, and browse. So last slide here, so we can get to some questions, but I just wanted to put in some of the negatives of the winter supplemental feeding. So just those unnatural congregations of deer has the ability to attract predators and potentially increase predation. There's disease concerns that come along with that. The increases stress and aggression. The strong wind, and it potentially can increase energy use due to that aggression or stress. It's also detrimental to the local vegetation, whether that's ornamentals, if you're near a suburb or a subdivision, and or if it's even native vegetation, those unnatural congregations can create that detriment to the local vegetation. And then also creates unnatural behaviors and movements. So if deer are being concentrated to a specific area, in general, deer are managed for the public trust. So it can create a type of feeding arms race to get deer to specific areas, which really doesn't benefit everybody. It has a potential. I don't know. I've seen a lot of places where it's pretty obvious that people maybe are feeding or have a bird feeder that's easily accessible to deer. You can see those well-defined trails in the snow, crossing roads, and it's almost certain that if you're going, since they're a crepuscular species, if you're going in the mornings and the evening, it's almost a given that you're seeing deer on those travel corridors. And then lastly, but this is not an exhaustive list, but lastly, what I have, so that acidosis, or you maybe heard grain overload, but it's just the inability to, for deer to digest those foods, so they die with a full belly, typically a full belly of grain, but it can happen even with alfalfa. But it's just switching from that, as we talked about with those winter adaptations, the ability to digest that low quality food. They don't have the ability to, if they switch from that low quality to very high quality, is fermenting those high in carbohydrates typically. So not good. And that is what I have. So I will take questions from there.
That was great, Todd. Very informative. I appreciate you coming on and explaining a lot of that stuff. Barb Keller is in the audience. She's our big game program leader. So I was going to bring her up here to make her a panelist and help answer any questions if she'd like to do so. We got a few of them in the Q&A here. So Jonathan asked a good hard question for you right off the beginning, Todd. So do changes in age class representation that can result from QDM, quality deer management, have any effect on winter survival? I would assume a larger portion of younger does making up the herd would reduce the fundidity in years with more severe WSI. Interested in your thoughts. So younger does, would that reduce the ability to breed or have more offspring?
Yeah, so he says I would assume a larger portion of younger does making up the herd would reduce fecundity with more severe WSI. Well, yeah, I guess that was I mean, a good one. I'm not sure that we could probably go back and forth on that in general, but if we're taking the principles of quality deer management is, it's not only, I guess QDM, when most people think of that as specifically, you know, older age class males, which is not just the case. QDM in general, the QDM principles are increasing or age class, but then also increasing herd quality, increasing herd health. So, having in general, a balanced in age and sex structure, simplistically speaking. So, it to answer that, I think we'd have to look at pregnancy rates. Typically, adult does have a higher pregnancy rate and have larger litter sizes. So if we're increasing or balancing age structure, ultimately, I think production would be higher. But when we have a well balanced age and sex class, where there's high quality habitat, if those does are those young female does, yearlings, and also fawns are in good condition, they're much more likely to be in the condition and to be bred. So, typically when you have high quality habitat, fawns are being bred in the first year and at higher proportions when they're in good condition. So I don't know if that really answers the question. I would say it helps deer overall, due to better herd health. I'm kind of rambling, so
Start off with a big hard one for you.
yeah. If John wants to, I guess, go get a hold of me, we can talk more about it. And I see Barb popped on, so maybe she has
Great.
wants to chime in as well.
I just wanted to turn my video. No, I think you pretty much covered it, Todd. QDM, I think, is mainly about keeping the deer population in balance with the habitat and maintaining a natural age structure, balanced age structure. So I think by taking enough does to keep the deer population balanced with the habitat is one benefit of QDM type of management, and would help in severe winters if that management kept deer numbers in the correct balance with the available habitat.
Great. Jeannie had a question referring to the back-to-back severe winters. Would acorn production play a part in the survival statistics?
Yes and no. I would say, well, in general, I mean, acorns and mast when available. So in a winter like this, where it's available all winter long, it would definitely increase the health of the deer, likely increasing survival, producing nutrients, the food availability. I would say it might be difficult, especially in northern Minnesota in those back-to-back severe winters when there's potentially well over a foot of snow, 2 feet of snow, 3 feet of snow. It's hard for them to dig and find acorns and or other mast or crops. So it maybe isn't as important as that those browse species are during the winter, but during those, I guess, spring green up times or if we have late snow, then I would say yes. So
great. Roger had a question about different zones. Is there a trend analysis of habitat conditions by zone? We go down that far?
So I guess I don't know, maybe need clarification of the question. Trend analysis of like how the habitat is trending by the zone.
I think that's what he was talking about, like, all the zones we have Minnesota divide up into and the habitat in this zone. Is there analysis of that by zone, or is it pretty much spread across the state?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's so in recent years, there's been much more research and analysis done on habitat types with newer computer systems. So with GIS and LiDAR stuff. So taking forest composition and I don't know specifically about the trend analysis by zone, or by forest type. I don't have that readily available. It might be, but that's something that we've definitely talked about in a need for analyzing that. I think there's also external factors that are influencing that. Just timber, the timber market's driving certain harvest, or if timber sale closed down, there's not as much need for a certain type of species. So very locally, but in general, a very important piece. I don't know, Barb, do you have anything to add to that? But I would say it is very important, especially with the new LiDAR data, something that we should be looking at.
Yeah, Todd, I'm also not aware of any sort of trend analysis that we have already conducted based on our deer zones. I would just add that our local wildlife managers have a really good finger on the pulse of what's going on with habitat in their areas, and they very much are involved in our deer management planning. And when we start looking at the outlook for a given year for deer harvest, something that we put out every year is a summary of what the regions, what's going on in the regions, which often includes some information about certain habitat issues in a region. For example, in the Southwest, we might be concerned about CRP and if that's been an increase or decrease and what that means for deer populations. So yeah, I hope that helped a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for that, Barb. That was a huge oversight on my part. Yeah, we definitely talk about habitat with, during season setting or setting bag limits with the area managers. On a local level, they have a much better grasp of that stuff. So that's where they come in and are vitally important for that.
Anton has a question, kind of plays off of that, Barb. How quickly does the WSI impact bag limits? For example, does this year's mild winter impact an upcoming season bag limits?
Yeah, it certainly may affect this upcoming season. It definitely plays a role when we have a severe winter. When we have a pretty severe winter in whatever region of the state, you can probably expect that the next year's bag limits are going to be down, that will reduce the bag limits. And of course, it depends where the deer population is relative to that goal that we set. If the deer population is above goal, we might not pull back so much on the bag limit. So it both depends on, yes, winter definitely plays a role in the upcoming fall's bag limit decisions, as well as where the deer population is at relative to goal. So for example, this upcoming fall, we'll certainly be taking into account this mild winter, but also we know that just one winter back, it was very severe, and we saw that result in some lower harvests in the region. So I wouldn't expect that because we're having a mild winter this year, everywhere in the state is going to see bag limits increase. It really depends on locally how that deer population is doing relative to the goals that we set.
Great, thank you. Todd, you mentioned a little bit about not feeding deer. Steve has a question here. I'm guessing, assuming Steve is maybe a landowner or somebody that likes the deer a lot. But he was wondering, anything people can do to support deer during a severe winter? What's an appropriate thing that we can do?
Yeah, he's got it there in his response. One thing is that cutting the browse or supporting that early successional growth of those new shoots or new buds. So a lot of that stuff, some of that stuff that was covered is in general those natural disturbances or those those cuttings to promote that early successional growth, and then just having that diversity of species or promoting growth of specific species that deer prefer, types of whether that's woody shrubs, a very common one, dogwood red osier, my favorite. So something like that. Definitely those focusing on those habitat improvements.
Great, that kind of answers Kyle's question too about what he can do as a landowner to help out. So some of those great things. Mark had an interesting one in here too. How important, if at all, is a liquid water source in winter? Thinking stocking ponds or rivers.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, let me.
I skipped ahead to you.
Reggie, can you read that? I'm not seeing that one. Okay.
He's talking about water. How important is a water source, liquid water, in the winter for deer versus eating snow? Do deer require a water source in the winter?
Well, yeah, I mean, in general, they need water, but they can obtain water through other ways, including snow and other sources. But typically, they are able to obtain water needs in areas dependent upon. I guess, like speaking of northern Minnesota, where a lot of stuff is frozen. Obviously, they're getting water from different sources, but in general, you can really key in, and that's if I guess me specifically hunting, especially if I'm depending on, it really doesn't matter what species it is, but if you can find a water source next to a food source next to a cover source, you're really doing yourself a favor. So yeah, obviously vitally important, but they do obtain those resources from other means besides say a lake or a river. But
Great. Jim, kind of keeping on the whole improving habitat theme here, Jim had a question. Are there any programs or funding available to assist a landowner with habitat management for deer?
I might phone a friend on this one too, Barb, but you can follow up with anything that I missed. But we currently don't have a private lands program. We used to, but we do not have that type of funding. But you know, we do have at various times of the year different types of grant and partnerships with you know, local organizations, which are typically on public land, but I'm not sure what type of those opportunities would be on private land. We don't have a private lands program specifically.
Would CRP fall into that category?
Sure. That's definitely a habitat improvement. That's I guess your best contact through that would be the NRCS of getting of that. That conservation reserve program is a federal program, not a state program. So
I was just gonna, plug our Conservation Partners Legacy Grant Program, which I think Todd, you were probably referring to. That's generally working with other organizations to partner on helping with different types of habitat work for wildlife in our state, but that's one opportunity we offer.
Yeah, our friend Blaine Clemming up north just kind of said the same thing. He was Fish and Wildlife Service FSA Farm Bill program. So there's a couple questions in here about food plots and with climate change coming in, playing an effect on this. So I try to get two of them in one here. Gary said your slide on deer foods was very informative. Is there current research documenting possible food sources? How about chestnuts in southeast Minnesota or some climate ready trees predicted? How well they'll do in Minnesota in the future? I don't know if you have any insight on that. I know we're not for the forestry department on trees, but you mentioned dogwoods, I think, in your
yeah, I
presentation.
think
But
there's a lot of resources out there through University of Minnesota Extension, or I mean, even DNR Forestry probably has a wealth of information about being climate ready and a potential, you know, species that will, you know, be more adaptable to future climate conditions or survive better in the anticipated changing trends. So that's where I would go. I think there's been a lot of research and study on that. Those just changing species, changing trends of what will fare better. And I guess I still specifically point that towards the University of Minnesota Extension or DNR Forestry. And just to circle back on that last one, that I'm being chided by one of our area managers that we also do have a private, you know, for our Department of Forestry, so a private forest management program. So within wildlife, we don't have a private lands program, but forestry does. So I would check in with that.
great, that's super helpful for people, I think. So, William, being that we're talking about forestry here and planting and different programs to help wildlife, I thought I'd hit on one other topic that we're not experts in. William was wondering, does the WSI how does that relate to grouse populations? With no snow, are grouse numbers reduced due to them not being able to burrow into the snow? I don't know if either of you have any feedback on the grouse population, but we had a good year last year for grouse, so.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an expert on grouse, I guess.
Where's Greg Holt chiming in when you need him, right? We had another one about, let's see if I can find it here. We got lots of questions coming in, so thank you for everybody that's asking all these questions. But Mike was wondering, how difficult is it to determine bag limits and maintain a deer management plan when you don't get very good comprehensive harvest data from certain DPAs?
Well, I guess specifically speaking to that, so what our starting point is off of determining bag limits is going off of our deer model, which is a harvest-based deer model. So, in the sense of that, getting a comprehensive harvest data from specific DPAs or DPAs that have lower harvest, the model does not function as well as some other DPAs. But with that said, we don't go off just as we don't with WSI or with the inputs from WSI. We know it's a model. We know there's limitations. It's good at detecting trends or predicting those trends. So we don't just run with what the model says. We take input from there. Obviously, social carrying capacity with deer. So social aspects related to deer. Those political aspects related to deer. Deer are a very popular species. So a lot of those aspects. So those public input from area manager meetings. The end of the deer season questionnaire, lots of other public input sessions. So and then also we're relying those experts on the ground, those area managers in the area, looking, as we talked about, some of those habitat conditions, what the deer numbers are they jiving with what the model is saying, and if they're not, we should be looking other ways. We're also looking at raw harvest in the sense of adult male per hunter. So lots of other things besides just the harvest model. So it's not always perfect, but we are looking at lots of other things.
All right. Well, I think with that, we're just about out of time. So do you guys have any final recommendations? You guys covered a lot on this program. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing all your knowledge about how the DNR goes about managing deer numbers and populations, and talked a little bit about habitat and the importance that plays too. So any closing thoughts?
Yeah. So Cassie asked me if I had any links at the beginning, and I kind of forgot to put a slide in on this, but we do, since I mentioned it in the last answer to the question. We have our end of the season deer questionnaire online and live right now. So you're able to input your comments and concerns and just observations throughout the deer season, and specifically to your DPA where you hunt. So that's on the home, I guess the deer management page on the very first link. So feel free to take that questionnaire and provide your input on deer management in Minnesota.
Right. We always forget that, it's the whole state that provides us input, and we're a few people that can't do the job everywhere across the state. So without the public input and help, we couldn't do as effective job as we do. So thank you both for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Hope everybody can join us next week. It's getting close to Valentine's Day. It is Valentine's Day next Wednesday. So episode 151, we're going to talk about a date with nature, the benefits nature plays, and some things you can get outside and do with your significant other to have a good time outside. So be safe, have a good weekend, and we'll see everybody next week. Looking forward to it.